everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Race to Revenue. I am thrilled to be joined today by Drew Houts, the Chief Sales Officer from Collaborative Solutions. We're going to be talking today about how to increase performance across a global sales team, something that Drew has spent his entire career doing. So pleasure to have you here, Drew. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Give us the background.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Kyle. Good to be with you today, and thanks for the opportunity. As far as background, I've sort of built my career coming up as an individual contributor and through a couple of different companies, some in North America, some globally, and have been at Collaborative Solutions now for the last 6 years. As you said, I'm currently the Chief Sales Officer.
And for those of us who may not know what Collaborative Solutions does, give us the elevator pitch. How do you explain the business?
So Collaborative Solutions is a digital transformation consultancy. So we use Workday as sort of the backbone of that digital transformation to help our clients through that transformation. We're a global company. We've got offices obviously scattered throughout North America, office in London and offices in Sydney and Melbourne, pretty heavy presence in India. So, we announced an acquisition a few weeks ago that will take us to about 2,000 employees globally. We've got a sales team of right around 100.
Pretty impressive. And so US, you've got offices in Europe, you've got Australia, you've got APAC, you've got truly a global organization. And we're going to be talking all about how you connect all these disparate groups together and how you can properly collaborate among all these revenue critical employees. But we're going to start by talking about the elephant in the room, which is the current macroeconomic conditions. Curious to hear what kind of adjustments, if any, you've made over the last, call it 6 to 9 months, as the macro has gotten uncertain at best and bad at worst.
I think when you talk about how you operate or the things that you do maybe a little bit differently in economically challenging times, to me, I don't know that a whole lot changes, but maybe you take a harder look at your execution. I talk to the team all the time about executing crisply, making sure we know that where we want to take our prospects and our clients, and that they're in agreement with that direction. And so you probably just take a little bit harder look at that execution because you don't maybe have as much pipeline or as many at bats, and so the ones that you do become more and more important. I think you also take a little bit extra time to make sure you have that executive alignment, whether it's our CEO or me or a peer of mine. Making sure that we're in communication with the executives and that we've got the ability to pick up the phone and call them if things are getting a little wobbly.
Absolutely. So I have 2 follow-up questions. One, you mentioned this execution and the focus, and you're spot on. There are fewer at-bats, and so you've got to make the most of every at-bat that you do get. Any key metrics that you're tracking to serve as a leading indicator of, okay, we're taking advantage of all the at-bats we get? Or how are you measuring this, analyzing it?
Yeah, I mean, certainly Clari helps us do that when I look at conversion rates or how things are flowing through the pipeline. Certainly, we've seen a lot more sort of shift to the right here in the last few months. But as far as the key things, it's that executive alignment, and then whether you call it a closed plan or sometimes we call it a joint execution plan that we put in front of the client when it's time to get that contract executed or work through an SOW process, making sure that we are aligned with them and we've documented what that looks like. To me, that's a huge part of the execution. I think the other thing too is, we do a pretty good job of doing deal reviews where we get the collective tribal knowledge, if you will, on the phone, and we make sure we're covering all the angles. And I think that's an important part of our execution as well.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So to add on to that, things that I know our sales leadership is looking at is days in stage, and our deals taking longer to progress from stage to stage. We're looking at how the ASPs are changing in early deals and seeing if a higher or lower ASP is changing deal velocity. We're looking, of course, at the conversion rates that you mentioned. And then my second question for you, following up on what you said, Drew, is the executive alignment. You said if something starts to look off, just pick up the phone and call. Tell us about a time. I'm curious if you can take us behind the curtain a little bit. What's the last phone call you made to your CEO to talk about perhaps some unpleasant news, or what was the situation?
I try to keep the unpleasant news to our team's chat, so so I don't get the full brunt of the reaction. But we stay in pretty lockstep. Carol and I do, and we talk or message most every day, and one of my big principles that I work off of is that, and we can talk about this as we get to some of the other questions, is transparency.
Yeah.
The business should never be wondering where we're going to land or what things are going to look like. And when we see risk, we do our best to flag it immediately. So most of those conversations aren't like hit them upside the head with a 2x4. It's something that we sort of saw coming down the road, and it's more confirmation of the risk that we'd already observed.
It makes a lot of sense, and that transparency is a huge part of what makes leaders effective, like yourself. I know it's something you believe a lot in. And speaking of transparency, speaking of expectations, how are you shepherding your team? Again, a global team across pretty much every time zone. Yeah. How are you shepherding them through all of the change that's happening right now, being transparent while also, maintaining that inspiration and ensuring that they still know what the mission is, and that, even though the times may be tough, it's not all bad news. How do you approach that?
Yeah, I think when you talk about motivating a sales team, I think the principles remain, whether in good times or bad times. It's about consistency of communication, and it's about transparency. So making sure that you've got a regular cadence set up, both at a global level, so I can talk with them directly. Although my all hands calls, I think, provide value, but you don't really get to dig in with the team or get a lot of reaction because you got a bunch of people on the phone. So I really think it's more about the weekly cadence up and down the management chain, and making sure that the communication stays consistent, and then transparency. When I do have my all hands, I often open up Clari and Salesforce, and I show them how everybody's stacking up, how we're stacking up to our annual goal, how the teams have fed into that. And of course, with that level of transparency comes a level of accountability to the team, because they get to see sort of where they and their teammates are and how it rolls up.
Bingo. And so many people I hear, Drew, they'll say, that level of transparency, that level of accountability, that you may have the reverse effect that you're intending. You may actually be intimidating people, but it sounds like you come down on the other side of that coin. You say, we're empowering people. We're giving them the information they need to go and execute what we need them to execute. Am I reading that right?
Yeah, I think empowerment is absolutely true. Look, I think when you sign up to be in sales and carry a quota, you sign up for that accountability. Yep. And so if that scares you, if you sort of, wilt, or it makes you anxious, or, it's not something you want to do, then you probably need to go find something different. And I talk to my team about that all the time. When we talk about a high performance sales organization, I talk about having to have the right talent, and the right talent are the ones that aren't afraid of that accountability, and they're not afraid to go out and make something happen.
Well, now I'm curious, because we're on this topic. You mentioned, that fearlessness, that the welcoming of accountability, that the high degree of autonomy that they're going to operate with. Any other hallmarks of super top talent for a salesperson, especially in these tougher times?
One of the major principles that I talk about when I talk about a high performance sales team is moving with speed and purpose. And I think when you talk about speed, it's your responsiveness to your clients as well as your internal customers. And then moving with purpose, I talk a lot about how there's no throwaway interactions with your clients and your prospects. You're always being evaluated. And if you don't behave that way, and there's not a purpose to your call, then you're not only wasting time, but you're putting yourself at a competitive disadvantage. When I was an individual contributor, every time I got on the phone with one of my clients, I made notes about what I wanted to come out of the other end of that call, and then that way I could measure the success of that call.
Do you have a framework for doing that, Drew? As presentation best practices or meeting management best practices, how do you, as the meeting owner, control that conversation and drive toward those outcomes?
In the interest of transparency, Kyle, is probably one of my weaknesses as a leader. A lot of this stuff as an individual contributor, I sort of did intuitively,
yeah.
And I don't necessarily put a lot of structure and those sorts of best practices in place, because part of it is that, again, because I did those things intuitively, but the other part of it is I am a big believer that successful salespeople come in all different packages, and what works for one may not work for the other. And what I do want to do is empower them to move and behave in a way that works for them, that they feel confident about, and they can engage their clients and prospects.
Really interesting now, Drew, because now I feel like if people are listening to this, they may be sensing what I'm sensing, which is perhaps some natural tension between running a global sales organization, valuing autonomy and individual style, but also knowing that you need to standardize and scale some things in order to be able to repeat and do things predictably. So how do you resolve that? Is that tension? And then if so, how do you think about resolving that?
Yeah, I don't mind that tension, and I don't necessarily need. You're right. We do need structure and process to scale an organization. And I think, to a large degree, we've done that. We can always be better. But giving the individual contributors the freedom and flexibility to move inside of that structure, I think is really, really important.
I think that's the right balance. You want to create the framework that says, hey, look, if you follow this framework letter to the law, you're probably going to be successful. But within that framework, there's room for individualization. There's room for different styles, for tweaks, for people to, skate toward perhaps their strengths or do things a little bit differently. And what I think is really interesting, and I know the way that you manage the team is with high degrees of collaboration. You've mentioned transparency a number of times here, and I imagine that also means transparency among people. Like if somebody is being successful, an individual salesperson successful on your team, they are willing and able and encouraged to share what's making them successful so that other people can pick it up. Am I reading that right?
Absolutely. I mean, certainly we do that in our annual sales kickoff. We give give folks the opportunity to sort of spotlight what they've done and how they've been successful. And then to a lesser degree, on my all hands, we provide that sort of venue and opportunity as well. My hope is that that's happening organically within the teams or even across teams, where they're sharing their successes and helping each other out. It's harder for me now that I sit in a global role to facilitate all of that than when I was a frontline or even second line manager, but it's certainly an important piece of creating a successful sales organization.
I couldn't agree more. That collaboration among peers, the sharing of best practices, the multiplication of people's efforts is critical. And so I don't think you're giving yourself enough credit, Drew. I'm curious to hear how you not enforce this necessarily, but how you keep your finger on the pulse to ensure that all of your line leaders are fostering the same sort of collaborative environment that you did when you were in their shoes. How do you keep your finger on the pulse?
Yeah, I mean, my philosophy is to stay close to my directs, and I have weekly one-on-ones with them, and then we have a weekly team meeting, and obviously tons of ad hoc conversations along the way, and try to give ourselves the opportunity to talk about the dynamics of the team, what's happening, and work together, not just on deals, but on people and how people are reacting and responding and relating to each other. Again, I don't know that I put a whole lot of structure around it, other than giving myself those structured times and opportunities to have those important conversations.
Makes a lot of sense. And now this expectation that you have for your salespeople to be collaborating and working together, sharing these best practices, it's great to hear that that is an always on sort of focus area for you. How do you think about collaboration across the entire go-to-market team? So your marketing folks, your sales engineers, your professional services team, how are you ensuring that there's that kind of horizontal collaboration and not just the vertical collaboration within your function?
Yeah, I mean, again, it comes down to just those structured times where we're able to sit down and have thoughtful conversations. I have a weekly call with our operations and delivery organization, my peers, where we block off an hour every Monday and we talk about the things that we need to talk about. And similarly with our marketing department, we have regular calls with them, probably more at a region level or team level that happens, which I think is actually a little bit better, because you're getting things done at the field level,
Right.
and it's not all dependent upon leadership.
Exactly. I'm curious. I lead the marketing team here at Clari, and I couldn't agree more, Drew. Having the leaders, segment leaders, we're not quite as mature as you are from a global footprint standpoint. We're getting there, but having our segment leaders from sales and marketing collaborating together to run nuanced sort of programs, nuanced campaigns that are going to make the most sense for their geo or industry or the company sizes that they're targeting. Really important. If you as a leader, the sales organization, marketing organization, are just passing down some blanket campaign that you're just expecting to work for everybody, you're probably going to struggle, especially in this macro. So I'm curious to hear about how have some of those kind of sub teams taken initiatives and run with them in a particular theater.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really important. It's been one of the keys to the way that we've scaled our business is to really verticalize by market. So certainly within region, the big global regions, but in North America, we've got 4, 5, 6 different market verticals that we've called out. And so what the stuff you're talking about, I think really happens at that level where we're able to create messaging and collateral that is specific to that market vertical, whether it's healthcare or banking and financial services or higher education and state and local government. Those are big areas of business for us as well. And being able to speak directly to them, that all happens at the field level where we're able to have those nuanced conversations. And my expectation is that our sales team is sort of the eyes and ears of the market, and they're giving that feedback loop to our marketing team about what the nuances of that message need to be.
That expectation is a critical one, and I'm curious. Enforce is probably not the right word, Drew, but how do you make sure that the eyes and ears that are the sales team, on the front lines, how do you ensure that information is actually looping back into the marketing team? Because I know it's easier said than done.
Yeah, it is. You're right. Yeah, it sounds great, but it's not always done. I think, look, there's always a natural tension, as you probably feel, Kyle, between marketing and sales and who's responsible for what. And so to me, it really comes down to when I get, somebody on my team that calls and says, why can't we do this or why can't we do that? Then it's a gentle pushback. Okay, well, what can you do to make that happen? And how can you communicate in a way that's effective and helps our collective team move the ball forward? But again, it's making sure we have those structured times where the team is able to provide that feedback to the marketing team or other areas of the organization. And I feel like we do a good job of that. It's once or twice a month, those teams are talking together and reviewing the plan, and whether it's a marketing event, lead gen, or conference, some other piece of collateral that we need. I feel like that communication is really happening.
You've talked a lot about transparency. You've talked a lot about expectations, and you just used another really important word, Drew, which is intent. these things don't just happen.
Right.
Part of leadership is carving out that intentional practice so that your sales leaders and marketing leaders are in the same room once or twice a month. So
I think it's real. Yeah, I mean, it's amazing how if I have a chunk of free time on my calendar, how it gets filled up with a bunch of busy. And so if I don't have those intentional and structured meetings on my calendar that are recurring to make sure that I provide focus as well as my team, then it just doesn't happen because it fills up with busy. And you also have to protect that. There's always something else you could be doing. Especially as a global leader, I found there's always something else, and so protecting the times that you've set out to have those focused conversations, I think, are really important. Otherwise, you end up spinning your wheels.
It's very well said. So now, kind of putting this all together, you've talked about these monthly meetings that you have cross-functionally. You've talked about the moments in the week and in the month that your sales team is responsible for. Their forecasting, their deal inspections, all these different processes that you have. The combination of all these things is what we at Clari think of as running revenue. Like these are the intentional cadence steps that you need to take to truly run revenue and not just expect that revenue just happens as an outcome at the end of the quarter, but rather it's a process that you can control, that you can experiment with, that you can improve. How do you think about running revenue?
Yeah. For me, run revenue just means everything that I love about my job. We're the tip of the spear. We're the ones that are out there moving the business forward on the front lines, and I love that. And I think the mechanics of running revenue are everything that we've talked about. It's that consistent communication. We have weekly forecast calls where we've got a healthy representation of our corporate leadership on the phone, and we're going deal by deal, and we pull up Clari and we work through it, and it's consistent, it's understandable, and it's transparent. And I think those are the things that I think about when I think about running revenue.
Consistency, transparency, intentionality, accountability. All of these words are important hallmarks. It sounds like of your team's culture. Is that a fair statement?
At least that's what I'm working for. Yes. Yes, that is a fair statement.
Love it. So everybody across Drew's team's got all these tattoos of all these different words that makes for an effective.
Actually, that's a great idea, Kyle. Maybe I need to work that into our SKO agenda.
Maybe temporary tattoos. We don't want to get you into too much hot water with the HR team.
Right.
Well, thank you so much, Drew. This has been super interesting. It's awesome to hear how you're stitching all of these practices together across all of this global team. Super impressive. Any closing thoughts, any advice that you would give to other sales leaders right now?
I think that, the thing, if I was talking to other sales leaders, the thing that I would encourage them to do is just manage the individual, surround yourself with strong leaders, and then manage the individual. I think it's really important to be able to understand, as I said earlier, that successful salespeople come in different packages, and when we try to start doing cookie cutters is when people get frustrated. So I think when people are motivated, when they feel like they're valued as individuals and that their strengths are valued.
People are motivated when they're valued as individuals. Powerful way to close there, my friend. Thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to another episode of Race to Revenue. Drew Houts, CSO from Collaborative Solutions. Really, really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Kyle. Appreciate it.
Bye now.